Really, Olivia? Still wearing the same jacket from last year? My sister Amanda's voice dripped with fake concern across our parents' massive dining table. I could give you some of my old designer pieces if you're struggling. I adjusted my supposedly unfashionable jacket, hiding my smile behind my wine glass. At 34, I'd grown used to being the family's designated failure, the perpetual disappointment who just couldn't seem to get it together according to their standards. Now Amanda, my mother chimed in, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she reached for the bread basket. Not everyone can be as successful as you and Michael. She shot me that familiar look of resigned disappointment. Some people just take longer to find their path. My brother Michael, fresh from buying his third luxury car this year, couldn't resist joining in. Speaking of paths, when are you going to upgrade from that apartment, Liv? The one with the, he paused dramatically, window air conditioning. The horror in his voice made me want to laugh. If only they knew about the papers in my bag, the ones I'd signed just this morning. I like my apartment, I said simply, taking another sip of wine. It's cozy. Cozy, Amanda scoffed. That's poor people speak for small. Our father, usually buried in his phone during these monthly family dinners, looked up briefly. You know, Princess, there's still an entry-level position at my firm if you're interested. The salary would at least get you into a better neighborhood. I thought about my tiny apartment, deliberately kept modest while I channeled my software engineering salary into more meaningful investments. The same salary that had just helped me close on Riverstone Manor, the historic estate my family had obsessed over for decades, but could never afford, even in their supposed success. I'm doing fine, Dad, I replied, watching him return to his phone with a dismissive shrug. Fine isn't exactly thriving, my mother sighed. Look at Amanda with her interior design business or Michael's car dealerships. They're making something of themselves. What they didn't know was that Amanda's successful business was drowning in debt, and Michael's dealerships were one bad month away from bankruptcy. I knew because I'd done my research, watching my siblings flash their wealth while their foundations crumbled. Did you see? Amanda suddenly perked up. Riverstone Manor finally sold. Can you believe someone actually had that kind of money? Mother, remember how you always said that would be your dream home? My mother's face fell slightly. Yes, well, some people are just lucky, I suppose. Though I heard it went for well above asking price. Must be some rich out-of-towner who doesn't know any better. I reached for my bag, fingers brushing against the contract inside. Actually, I started, but Michael cut me off. Speaking of real estate, he boasted, I'm looking at a new vacation home. Something modest, only about 7 bedrooms. That's wonderful, darling, my mother beamed. Olivia, you should ask your brother for investment advice. Clearly, whatever you're doing isn't working. I pulled out the folder from my bag, sliding it across the table. Funny you should mention investment advice. What's that? Amanda asked, peering at the folder with mild curiosity. Did you finally get a better job? No, I said, opening the folder to reveal the Riverstone Manor contract, my signature fresh at the bottom. I just bought your dream house, Mom. The silence that fell over the dining room was deafening. My mother's fork clattered against her plate, and for the first time in years, my father's phone lay forgotten on the table. This is a joke, Amanda stammered, grabbing the papers. There's no way you could afford. The historic Riverstone Manor, complete with its original gardens, 8 bedrooms, and that fountain you always admired, Mom. I finished calmly. I close next week. But how? My mother's face had gone pale, her hands trembling as she reached for the contract. It turns out living below your means and making smart investments pays off, I said, finally allowing myself to smile. Oh, and that struggling software engineering career you've all been so worried about, I'm actually quite good at it. Michael, trying to recover his composure, forced a laugh. Well, property taxes alone will bankrupt you within a year, not to mention maintenance costs. All accounted for, I cut him off. Unlike some people, I don't buy things I can't afford. The look of shock on their faces was worth every snide comment, every dismissive gesture, every pitying glance I'd endured over the years. But this was just the beginning. They had no idea what else I had in store for them. The next week passed in a blur of frantic calls and unexpected visits. Word had spread through our family's gossip network like wildfire. Quiet, unsuccessful Olivia had bought Riverstone Manor. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Aunt Patricia, who'd snubbed me at last year's Christmas party, suddenly wanted to catch up over coffee. Cousins who previously ignored my existence were now flooding my social media with friend requests. But it was my immediate family's reaction that truly amazed me. Amanda showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening, clutching a bottle of expensive champagne. "Sister bonding," she announced, breezing past me into my tiny living room. "We should celebrate your unexpected success." I watched her scan my apartment with new eyes, probably trying to spot signs of hidden wealth. "That's thoughtful of you, Amanda," I said, taking the bottle. "Though I remember you being too busy to come over the last 6 times I invited you." She waved her hand dismissively. "Water under the bridge. Now tell me, how did you really afford Riverstone? Private investor? Secret inheritance?" Oh, her eyes lit up. "Are you dating someone rich?" "I told you," I replied calmly. "I saved and invested wisely." "But that's impossible," she blurted out. "You live here, you drive that old car, you wear—" She gestured at my clothes. "That." I smiled, remembering the other properties in my portfolio that my family knew nothing about. Appearances can be deceiving. Michael tried a different approach. He called me to apologize for any past slights and mentioned he was having some temporary cash flow issues with his dealerships. "Nothing serious," he'd assured me, "but if you're interested in a partnership opportunity—" Sorry, I cut him off. "My investments are already allocated." Then came my parents. Mother arrived first, armed with interior design magazines and grand renovation plans. "Darling," she gushed, spreading the magazines across my kitchen counter, "I've been thinking about Riverstone's potential. That east wing would make a perfect family gathering space. We could host all our monthly dinners there." I let her ramble on for a few minutes before speaking. "Mom, I'm not renovating Riverstone for family gatherings." Her face fell. "But surely you're not planning to live in that massive house alone. It's meant for family." "You're right," I agreed. "It is meant for family. Just not ours." "What do you mean?" I pulled out my laptop, showing her the proposals I've been working on. "I'm turning Riverstone into a shelter for families in crisis. The East Wing will house single mothers getting back on their feet. The West Wing will be transitional housing for families escaping domestic violence." My mother's face went through several shades of pale. "You're turning our dream house into a shelter." "Your dream house," I corrected her. "My investment in the community." She left in tears, and my father arrived the next day, all business. "This shelter idea," he said, settling into my IKEA armchair with obvious discomfort, "it's admirable but impractical. Let's discuss numbers. I'm prepared to make an offer on the property." I met his gaze steadily. "It's not for sale, Dad." "Don't be difficult, Olivia. Everyone has a price." "Not me." I handed him a folder. "These are the renovation permits. Work starts next month." He opened the folder, his expression darkening as he read. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes, and before you try to interfere, everything's already legally set up. The property is held in a trust specifically for this purpose." My father stood up, his jaw tight. "You've changed, Olivia." "No, Dad. I just stopped pretending to be who you wanted me to be." As he left, I thought about the years I'd spent being the family disappointment. How they dismissed my choices, mocked my lifestyle, and underestimated my capabilities. They'd been so focused on appearances, on impressing their social circle with visible displays of wealth, that they'd never noticed me quietly building something meaningful. That evening, I drove to Riverstone Manor, parking in front of the grand entrance that had so captivated my mother. The sunset painted the old stones in warm gold, and for a moment, I could picture it as my family had always imagined it. A showcase of wealth and status, a monument to success as they defined it. But then I imagined it as I saw it, rooms filled with children who'd never had a safe place to sleep, mothers finding their strength again, families rebuilding their lives. Real success wasn't about impressing others, it was about making a difference. My phone buzzed with another message from Amanda. "Mom's devastated. How could you do this to the family?" I smiled, typing back, "I'm not doing anything to the family. I'm doing something for families who really need it." Then I turned off my phone, pulled out my laptop, and got to work. The contractor's estimates needed reviewing, and I had a meeting tomorrow with a nonprofit organization that would help run the shelter. My family might never understand my choices, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking their approval. I had bigger plans in mind. 6 months later, I stood in Riverstone Manor's newly renovated entrance hall, watching as the first family moved in. A young mother clutched her daughter's hand, their few belongings packed in worn suitcases. The little girl's eyes widened as she took in the grand staircase. "Is this really where we're going to live?" she whispered to her mother. "For now, sweetheart," her mother replied, tears in her eyes. "We're safe here." My own eyes misted over as I showed them to their room, freshly painted in cheerful colors with new furniture and tiny fairy lights strung across the ceiling for the little girl. This was what real success looked like. The local newspaper ran a story about Riverstone's transformation. "Historic Manor becomes haven for families in need." The headline read. My family's reaction was swift and predictable. "You've made us a laughingstock," my mother wailed during an unexpected visit to my apartment. "The country club is buzzing with gossip. Do you know Mrs. Henderson asked if our family had financial troubles?" I continued typing on my laptop, working on plans for the Manor's Education Center. "And what did you tell her?" I said we were supporting your charitable endeavors," she admitted, sinking onto my couch. "Though I don't understand why you had to use Riverstone for this project. We could have found you another building." "Mom," I said, finally looking up, "this was never about you or the family's reputation. Some things are more important than what people at the country club think." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "But we're Caldwells. Image is everything." "No, Mom. Image is nothing. Impact is everything." Amanda and Michael kept their distance, though I heard through the grapevine that Amanda's business had finally collapsed under its debt, and Michael had been forced to sell 2 of his dealerships. Their carefully maintained facades of success were crumbling, while my failure had transformed into something they couldn't quite comprehend. My father, surprisingly, was the first to show a glimmer of understanding. He showed up at Riverstone one afternoon, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit amid the children playing in the gardens. "I saw the newspaper article," he said, watching a group of kids chasing each other around the fountain. "The shelter's at full capacity." "Yes," I replied, "and we have a waiting list." He nodded, unusually quiet. "Your grandmother, my mother, she left an abusive marriage with nothing but a suitcase and me. We spent 3 months in a shelter much less nice than this." He turned to me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "She would have been proud of what you've done here." I hadn't known that about my grandmother. Dad had never talked about their past, too busy building his image of success to acknowledge where he came from. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. He hesitated, then nodded. As we walked through the manor, I showed him the education center where residents could take GED classes, the computer lab for job searches, the playroom filled with donated toys and books. Children waved at us, women nodded politely, and slowly I watched my father's rigid posture relax. In the kitchen, where a cooking class was in session, he finally spoke again. "This isn't what I imagined for you, Olivia. I wanted you to be successful." "I am successful, Dad, just not in the way you imagined." He looked around the warm, bustling kitchen, then back at me. "No," he said slowly, "you're more successful than I imagined." 2 weeks later, a large anonymous donation arrived for the shelter's education program. I recognized my father's company's banking details on the transfer. The next monthly family dinner was different. My mother still fretted about appearances, and Amanda still wore her designer clothes like armor. But something had shifted. When I talked about the shelter's programs, they listened. When I mentioned our needs for the upcoming winter, my father took notes. "You know," my mother said tentatively over dessert, "I might have some time to help with those art classes you mentioned, if you still need volunteers." It wasn't a complete transformation. They were still the Caldwells, still concerned with status and image. But they were learning slowly that success could look different than they'd imagined. As for me, I kept my modest apartment and my old car. But now, when my family called me poor, I just smiled, knowing that wealth isn't always about what you own. Sometimes it's about what you give away. The little girl from that first family still lives at Riverstone with her mother, who's now taking business classes and helping run the shelter's kitchen. Sometimes, when I see them in the garden, the girl waving at me from beside the fountain, I think about how my family's dream house became something better than any of us could have dreamed. It became a home for people who really needed one.